Russian President Vladimir Putin says he agrees with a proposal to end the fighting in Ukraine, but that any deal should lead to enduring peace. Speaking at a press conference in Moscow alongside his Belarusian counterpart, Putin thanked U.S. President Donald Trump for the attention he has given to the conflict in Ukraine. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to meet Putin to discuss Washington's peace proposal later today. Now, while Putin claimed to support an end to hostilities, he emphasized that many questions remain.
We
agree with the proposals to stop the fighting. But the ceasefire should be one that leads to a long-term peace. And eliminates the root causes of this crisis.
Grzegorz Szymanowski has more for us from Riga. He's followed this press conference very closely. Grzegorz, he says he agrees to the U.S. proposal in principle, but he wasn't too excited about the details either, was he?
Yes, Nicole, this list of reservations is quite long, and this is signaling that Russia could take time before committing to anything. But the most important issues raised by Vladimir Putin were, first of all, the situation in the Kursk region, the piece of land in Russia, still partially occupied by the Ukrainian forces. Vladimir Putin suggested that in case of a ceasefire, the Ukrainian soldiers there should surrender. And he also said that the decision regarding the ceasefire will be based on the success in the Kursk region, success for the Russian side, obviously. He also said that a control mechanism is necessary to keep the truce in place, to prevent any breaches. And finally, he also mentioned the issues of mobilization and rearmament in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin would possibly like to prevent Ukraine from being able to still mobilize new soldiers and receive weapons from abroad during the ceasefire. So these were the issues brought up by Putin today.
All of that, of course, coming from a man who has broken numerous ceasefires in the past. Now, Grzegorz, he also talked about the need to eliminate the root causes of the crisis. That's a Kremlin talking point we've heard over and over. It refers to the so-called denazification, Russia's territorial claims, and dashing Ukraine's NATO hopes. Does he have much leverage to bargain this way?
Well, yes, this is quite a nebulous statement, and this can really mean everything and nothing. But I think this shows that Vladimir Putin really wants to pursue a final deal, a peace settlement on Ukraine quite fast from the position of strength in which he sees himself. As you said, the Russian goals in Ukraine are quite well known, and I think he would like to talk about them with the Americans directly. But when you follow Vladimir Putin's speeches over the years, very often the root cause for the mistrust between the West and Russia, from his perspective, is the NATO expansion to the east. So would he go as far as to discuss the current security architecture in Europe with this current American administration? He might take a shot at it.
You say he wants to talk directly to the U.S. He has a chance to do that today. The U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff is in Moscow for talks with him. How can the Americans convince the Russians to accept their ceasefire proposal?
Yes, the conversations in Moscow are happening right now behind closed doors, so obviously we don't know what are the carrots that the American delegation brought with itself. Vladimir Putin mentioned one point of negotiations being international companies returning to Russia, possibly, but I think that there is still an important role to be played by the American president, by Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin in this press conference thanked Donald Trump personally for his engagement in this issue, in this ceasefire. So I think this shows that he really wants to play nice with him. And he also mentioned that possibly a phone call between Putin and Trump might be necessary to solve the outstanding issues.
That's DW's Grzegorz Szymanowski in Riga. Thanks so much. Dmitri Alperovitch joins us now. He's a security expert and co-founder of the think tank Silverado Policy Accelerator in Washington, D.C. Great to see you again, Dmitri. Now, Vladimir Putin could have stopped this war long ago. In fact, he could stop it right now as we speak. In his logic, why should he agree to the American ceasefire proposal?
Well, he feels like he cannot say no to Donald Trump right now, given that the bigger prize beyond just Ukraine now is an improved relationship between the United States and Russia, given that he's looking to potentially get rid of sanctions that have been placed against Russia, do joint projects in the Arctic and elsewhere, potentially drive further rift between Europe and the United States and cause issues for NATO. So he's looking at all that as saying, I cannot antagonize Donald Trump. I need to play ball. I will say yes, but with many buts, many conditions that I will attach to before I accept the ceasefire.
Let's look at these conditions, or one of them at least. He talked about the need to eliminate the root causes of this crisis. It's something that we've heard a lot coming out of the Kremlin, but we know that that includes not recognizing Ukraine's right to exist as a sovereign nation. Isn't that a non-starter for negotiations?
Yeah, I think we have to disaggregate the two issues of a ceasefire for 30 days and a longer-term peace agreement. On a longer-term peace agreement, I think the two sides are still very, very far apart. Putin has not rejected his maximalist demands for, of course, annexing the 4 regions of Ukraine, including parts of those regions he doesn't even control, changes to the Ukrainian political systems, and no membership in NATO, no Western troops in Ukraine, and many others, all of which are basically unacceptable to Ukrainian leadership. But for the 30-day ceasefire, you might have an opportunity to get something done. He's not going to accept an unconditional ceasefire that the Ukrainians and the Americans have agreed to in Saudi Arabia. He's going to want clearly Ukrainian forces ejected from the Kursk region in Russia that they invaded last year. He will probably ask for limits or potentially a pause again on military aid to Ukraine while the ceasefire is ongoing. So there will be many conditions that you'll try to put on Ukraine in order to get to this 30-day pause.
Now, he can ask for a lot. How do you think the U.S. will position itself, especially in the talks that we're seeing today and that phone call with Donald Trump that might come up?
Well, we will see. Donald Trump has indicated that his overarching priority is to get the end to the fighting, the end to the dying, as he says, and ultimately a peace deal here. So I think he's going to be very focused on how do we get this done. If Putin is accepting the framework but wants certain conditions, Washington may potentially be looking favorably to some of them, but maybe not all.
Russia claims to have regained control of the Kursk region. How much do you think that weakens Ukraine's negotiation position?
Well, they haven't fully gained control. They've liberated, in their words, of course, a lot of that territory in the last couple of days. But Ukrainian forces are still holding some of that territory. Again, Putin said that there can be no ceasefire even for 30 days as long as Ukrainians are on Russian territory. Of course, he's neglecting to say that his forces are continuing to occupy Ukraine and have no intentions of leaving it. But I think that until that either gets solved on the battlefield or Ukrainian forces fully withdraw from that region, I don't think you'll see a ceasefire.
Let's talk a little more about sticks and carrots here. You mentioned sanctions. We're looking at Kursk, of course. How do you think the U.S. is trying to pressure Putin behind closed doors today?
Well, I think they're indicating to him that, look, not only will you not see an improved relationship that you are now hoping for between Moscow and Washington, but things can get much worse. Even though sanctions are pretty comprehensively applied now against the Russian economy, they're not enforced as aggressively as it could be. So there could still be a lot of pain that can be brought on Moscow. And Donald Trump has indicated, at least on Truth Social posts, that he's willing to use that as a stick to try to get Russia to comply.
Donald Trump has called Putin's response today promising but incomplete. Now, the possibility of a phone call is being floated. Trump continues to be unpredictable, especially when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Can Putin maybe, in a direct conversation with him, get him to agree with Russia's key proposals, maybe get into his head in a way?
I think it's absolutely possible. And look, again, Donald Trump is focused squarely on ending this fighting, on getting some sort of cessation of hostilities here. And if he sees an opportunity to do so by exceeding some of Putin's conditions, he may push the Ukrainians to do so.
What would that mean for Ukraine?
Well, it depends on what those conditions are. And look, Ukraine actually has a lot of the cards, despite what you've heard from Washington, because it can decide to continue the fighting even without American aid if the Europeans step up and keep providing arms and intelligence resources to Ukraine. It won't be as good as American capabilities. It'll be much more difficult, but they have those options. So Kyiv will ultimately have to decide whether it's worth to keep fighting or whether it's worth to get a pause, maybe with the conditions that are not as attractive as they would have liked.
Dmitri Alperovitch, security expert and co-founder of the Silverado Policy Accelerator. Always great speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.